Chapter 2, page 25, Part 2. Reading. Punishment by the numbers. For decades, criminologists have tried to predict what type of person is most likely to commit crimes and which convicted criminals are most likely to return to a life of crime after prison. Until now, these predictions were wrong as often as they were right. However, today, the state of Virginia is using statistics to figure out who to send to prison and how long they should stay there. Statisticians are using numbers the same way insurance agents do, to predict the likelihood of an event based on a short list of factors. For example, if a young, jobless man is convicted of shoplifting, the state is more likely to recommend prison time for him than for a middle-aged, employed woman who commits the same crime. Why? Because statistics show that the woman is far less likely to commit the crime again. Judges in Virginia are using these predictive measures to decide on sentences for nonviolent crimes. Why did they turn to statistics? Virginia's prison population was growing 2 times faster than the national average. Legislators wanted to stop spending money building new prisons. If they could figure out whom they could release, they could reduce their prison population. Researchers spent a lot of time creating the system. First, they studied 1,500 criminals for 3 years after their release from prison. They found that men were 55% more likely to be rearrested than women, and that offenders in their 20s were a much higher risk than those older than 40. Those without jobs were also a higher risk. Those who weren't married were too. The criminologists then used their findings to create a 71-point scale. If a defendant scores 38 points or less, he or she doesn't have to go to prison. Instead, the criminal will receive a non-prison punishment, such as a fine or house arrest. They tested their model on prisoners who had been released 5 years earlier. They found that the prisoners' scores correctly predicted who would commit a crime again 75% of the time. Only 12% of those who scored less than 35 committed new crimes, while 38% who scored higher were reconvicted. Meanwhile, the state's prison population has stopped growing. However, not everyone is happy with the new system. Skeptics ask why a married woman in her 40s who sells drugs should receive a lesser sentence than a single man in his 20s. In fact, according to the risk scale, unemployed single men in their 20s start with a score of 36 points before their crime has even been committed. If you're punishing people because of a bunch of factors that have nothing to do with blame, well, you're not in the business of doing justice anymore, said Paul Robinson, a law professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Economists also point out that there's another problem. The system might actually encourage people with low scores to commit crimes. Virginia defends itself by pointing out that judges can ignore the scale. It seems clear that the system is imperfect, but not irrational.